Welcome, everybody. Great to see you. So it's a little bit quieter today. And we joked that we don't have Ron here with us. But it's a little quieter, which is actually a good segue into our topic today, which is on silence. Last week, we talked about Shavuot coming up, and we focused on one aspect of it, which was the book of Ruth and inclusivity, sort of expanding the tent even beyond the prohibition against allowing a Moabite into the community. Today, I want to focus on a different aspect of receiving Torah from Sinai, which is silence, because there's this sort of paradoxical account of seeing the thunder and hearing the lightning, so our senses were flipped and inverted. But we know that there was lightning and thunder, so it was very loud. And yet, when Torah is given, the first letter of the first word of the first commandment is Aleph of Anochi, which is silent. And there's Midrashim about hearing that silence, which we'll get to. But then Eliyahu, the prophet, years later, when the prophets are being persecuted, he finds himself at the same mountain, at Mount Sinai, where Torah is given. And we have a very famous account of how there was earthquake, there was fire, but God wasn't in the earthquake, God wasn't in the fire, God was in the silence, in the still small voice. So I wanted us to explore silence today. So to open it up, as we typically do with a go around, I want to ask you if there was a time where silence reached a place where words could not. If there was maybe something that you felt could only have been communicated in silence, or if there was a moment of silence that served as sort of an epiphany moment for you, like maybe sort of Thoreau and Walden style, getting away from the noise of society to retreat into the woods, and there it all becomes clear. So either an epiphany moment or a time where silence reached a place where words never could. I know we're already getting a late start. I'm going to make a quick plate as we're thinking, and I'll be back in just 30 seconds for 30 seconds of silence to think about. And as always, I want to give a big thank you to both Harlan, our volunteer, and to Lisa for making us an incredible lunch, as always. Thank you for feeding us, and this looks amazing. How are you guys doing? Thank you for this. It's incredible. Yeah. Thank you. All right, so let's have some volunteer. Go ahead, Sheila. Yeah.
I do well no, can't keep my mouth shut. That was my attribute, but every once in a while, I do keep quiet. I don't answer some things. I stay quiet. And I'm rewarded because, in other words, I'm not responding to somebody who has said something outrageous.
Got it. Okay, good. So your silence at times is in response to.
Very few times, but you know.
But something that is sort of designed to provoke and maybe could ensnare you into a shouting match. But instead you sort of opt for silence to maybe collect your thoughts or to not engage in something that could just end nowhere good.
Yeah.
So silence is a really helpful tactic in that way. Great, Jerry.
Yeah, I would echo what Sheila said, and I would add to it that is by far the most common situation in which silence is a good idea, because we are often faced with various opinions from others to which, if we responded in a certain way, there'd be nothing good. It's a lose-lose situation. So
Right.
I would agree completely with what Sheila said.
Sometimes it's sort of a ensnaring, right? There's a trap being laid and you can avoid it by not falling right into it. But that, so we're gonna come back to that as silence being a siyag, lechokhmah, which, is from Mishnah, Proverbs. I don't know if I actually included it in the final source sheet here, but our tradition says that silence is a fence protecting wisdom. So, and the way I understand that is exactly how you've just described it, that, instead of opening your mouth and in the heat of your rage or the heat of a moment of lack of judgment, say something you'll regret or lose your temper in a way that, you know, is not going to reflect your, what you truly necessarily feel if you had more time to think about it. In that way, silence is like a fence or a guardrail against protecting wisdom. Go ahead.
Well, my fences aren't so good a lot of the time because I'm a reactor. I've always been that.
Welcome, hi.
My family knows that don't listen to the first thing I say.
Yeah.
Wait a second and then I'll. So silence is hard for me.
Yeah.
I think the time where it affected me the most was at my father's funeral, when I'm standing and people are coming in, and we were in Pittsburgh, and in walks friends who had driven from here, and nothing was said, but it was the best feeling in the world. It was the best feeling in the world, and we didn't say anything. We just looked at each other, and it meant a lot.
Beautiful. Okay, so a couple things here, and thanks for sharing. One, where I thought you might be headed was when talking about death or loss or grief, often silence is the only real response, because words just can't capture, you don't have the words. And Aaron, the high priest, when his two sons die, it says, Vayidom Aaron, right? When Nadav and Avihu are killed in the strange fire, when they offer something in the Mishkan, in this portable sanctuary that they should not have offered, it's called strange fire. They're killed when Aaron hears about it, Vayidom, he's quiet, he's silent. The only sort of response to that tragedy that we're, and the commentators really try to fill in the gaps of what that silence means. Is it acceptance? Is it sort of mirroring what he perceives to be God's silence? Like why didn't God warn me about this? Or how, you know, so maybe it's sort of like a angry silence. Hello.
You for my chauffeur, otherwise I would be here. Cannot drive.
That's okay. She's telling me how to drive. No silence. Yes.
I'm so nice to see you. I'm so glad. Yeah, I did. I just responded. Thank you so much. Welcome back. It's so. Really?
Can we open the camera?
Oh, no.
It's over you.
Yeah. You're great. I'm so glad that you're here with us in person. I missed you. Is that right? Is it official?
Alina.
We have a congrats on retirement.
I've been retired.
You've been retired. I'm not sure.
Or somebody.
So Sheila, were you saying? Go ahead.
Talking about when they don't have, you don't have to, what is very effective. You hold your hand, just nodding, the way you look. Your expression. Your body language is really
Right,
a very effective.
right. So thank you for reminding me the second component, the second piece of that, which is that silence can be a response to tragedy and to something experiencing something negative. Silence can also be the response to something incredibly positive. Obviously, in the context of your story, it's still very negative. But there was a deep feeling of being held and seen and joy of friendship. Driven all the way to Pittsburgh, driven all the way to Pittsburgh to be there. And sometimes there are no words to express the joy. So good. It can also be a response to the positive. If you're just joining us, we're talking about silence.
I have a daily meditation practice, which is mostly about, relaxing and being able to sleep better. But what I learned about it is that it is so. It's just, it's the ultimate way that I determine that I am not in charge. I don't understand, I don't have the answer, and I certainly don't have the words. So that's my lesson in meditation.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. So, Marcia talking about, meditation and how silence opens you up, and there's sort of a humbling, effect of meditation and silence, because instead of filling the space, you are, allowing sort of the world to fill you, right? And I think that if you think you have all the answers, if you think you know, then you're inclined to produce output and fill space. But in meditation, when you just sit in silence and sort of focus on your breath and the world around you and try to really tap into your own thoughts and not judge them, but let them through, you are, there's something humbling about that. That's like, I don't need to be filling, I need to receive. Right, and it opens you up to listening to things you might not otherwise hear. So whether that's your own inner voice or the world around you, that we so often just tune out as white noise. But to really take a moment to focus in on all that, and then what do you learn? Maybe it's a deeper insight about yourself. Which is why there's no coincidence that our most valuable, our most significant, I guess, prayer, what the rabbis called hatfilah, is the silent Amidah, right? Tfilah b'lachash, because maybe there is an insight there that you're elevating, that the rabbis want us to practice our daily meditation 3 times a day of silent prayer. That there needs to be silence in our prayer, because again, maybe praising God in the form of silence is in some ways even better than praising with word. Go ahead, Jack.
I remember something my daughter said to me. She said, when she or her brother do something that was clearly not a desirable thing, there was a bad outcome. And she said, we couldn't stand it when you would be very silent. We knew we were really in trouble.
Right. Yeah.
She said, we would rather you just screamed at us. We knew you wouldn't. But inside we were screaming.
Yeah.
You know, what Jackie is saying, one of the effects is that they used to play organ music during the silence in the I mean,
Right. Yeah,
there's some people, but
right,
they didn't know what to do with it.
right. We have a real discomfort with silence. And I think, Helena, I heard you joke, silence, that's hard for Jews, right? With silence. And so we seek to fill that space. Music, right? You could say, but to make the case for music, that, maybe our prayer is being carried up on the wings of music, and that's a beautiful thing. But also, I think it does reflect this, why can't we just truly embrace the silence for a moment? Why do we have to be so uncomfortable with it? Try to cover it up.
I think with silence is part from, they may be.
Sounds of silence.
Yes, exactly.
But Rabbi, it's also could be used as a form of parental control. If you had done something wrong, and my father making recipes was the best person. He could send me to Coventry, which means they don't torture you for months. And I never understood it, but I hate it. I just hate it when people shut down like that. So yeah, I get it. I get what they're trying to say.
Right, and right, the fact that that's worse, right? If you're mad at me and you yell at me, that's fine, we'll get over it, at least I know where you're at. Silence,
Oh, it's awful.
right, it's exactly what you were saying, it's that is where because it's surpassed. Like, we've reached a higher level now. Go ahead.
But interestingly, if you go to a very Orthodox synagogue, the Amidah is not silent. Because actually, everybody's saying it out loud at the same time in kind of a soda voice, kind of,
Right.
but it's not a silence.
Well, that's really interesting, right? Because I guess we're all whispering, but we're all doing it. It becomes, it sort of multiplies. Yeah.
And you can't effectively govern because anybody who's governing how that is. And you're trying to do it, it gets in the way. In other words, they're talking against you and you can't think
Right.
or do anything. I mean, it's a problem, but it's sort of a good problem.
Yeah.
But it's an issue, I think, more than a problem.
Right.
What's
Well, it depends, right? In the context of like kids in a service that are running around and that's a good problem to have, right? Because, yeah, okay, I can't focus on my prayer, but the shul is full of life and kids who are hopefully having a positive experience who will grow up to love shul and keep coming. And so, and prayer takes many forms, right? Like the Hasidic tale about the person who didn't know the words. And in some versions, it's somebody who has cognitive impairment, somebody who's maybe on the spectrum, right? And sort of offering a prayer that is just sounding like yelling or it's indecipherable, right? But then the rabbi and everyone's complaining, saying, I can't focus on my own prayer because of this noise, right? And the rabbi silences the community and says, this prayer that this person is uttering is the first true, authentic prayer I've heard. And right, that sometimes it's not about saying the word correctly, it is the spirit with which it's offered, which brings us to reach nichoach. I've always thought that maybe this pleasing odor that comes from the sacrifices isn't the actual content of the sacrifice, but the spirit with which it's offered. Alina, yeah.
To say so, the worst punishment is in prison, for example, is isolation.
Right.
Yeah.
You are isolated from anybody. You have no contact. You cannot talk to anybody. It's a horrible form of
Right.
punishment.
And I think also coming from,
Same thing when you live alone,
right,
the isolation, if no one calls, if I put the TV on loud to hear some noise in the background. So whoever lives alone for many years knows that and understands it.
right. We're social animals, right? One of the biggest forms of torture is not having interpersonal connection or just the silence, which becomes deafening. Makes me think, so we're gonna, at the end, Rabbi David Wolfe has a book called In Speech and in Silence. I'll give more context when we get there, but he mentions at one point that the scream, right, that famous painting is
So powerful.
so powerful. He says one of the things that's so powerful about it is that it's silent. It's silent scream because it's art. So you can't actually hear the scream, but it would be something, it would be less impactful if you could hear it. It's the fact that you're filling in the gaps, right? That whatever scream that you are producing by looking at it, that is much more impactful than sound could actually. So sometimes silence reaches a place that words can't.
I hate to bring this up, but.
Go ahead, I'm gonna get the source sheet up, but I'm listening to you.
Okay. On that list, a lot of articles. And a certain gentleman, anyway, his wife and son, and their reaction to trial.
Uh-huh.
And it has to do with complete silence. It all has to function about dress and the way they move.
So at the Shul Sisters concert,
Yeah.
they finished one, I don't remember which number, but it was a cappella
Mhm.
and quiet. And when they finished, there was not a sound.
Right?
They went,
Yeah.
until they went to their next number, and then there was applause for that number. But the one particular trio that was a cappella was dead silence when they were done.
Why? Do you know why?
It was, everybody was in the mood of the piece, of the music. And they didn't want to break that mood, is what I would say. There's an old saying, better to leave your mouth shut.
Then to open your mouth and remove all
that.
to remain silent and let others think you're a fool, then to open your mouth and remove all that. I love that one, and we have our Jewish version of that here. I'm gonna share this now. And I just want to say, Siona, you just mentioned something at the start of class about your trip to Israel. You just got, so welcome back home
Thank you.
from home, from Israel, but you were saying that it's a country of contrast, right? That there is such grave sorrow and loss, but also there's still always so much vibrancy in life. And I think that with the Schul sisters at the end, with the acapella, I think there is something about a break in the music. That when the music comes back, it's that contrast that really is
Well,
powerful.
music is not music. Music is not music without the spaces.
Yes, right, it's the spaces in between. And in jazz, they say it's the notes you don't play, right? Okay, let me get the source sheet up. So our Zoomers can follow along.
Very interesting poster that was put out one year
Uh-huh.
dealing with Hiroshima
Mm.
and the atomic bomb. And my daughter was in that choir, and the poster was just bars, but no notes.
Wow.
And there's the sound of silence.
Wow, there you go. And we're gonna get to, again, the music metaphor that continues as well. So thank you for sharing. Wow, very powerful. Okay, so first, this is a text that many of us may be familiar with. But let's go ahead and read it. This again is the prophet Elijah encountering God on Mount Sinai. This is long after Torah is given. Does somebody want to read? Go for it.
Come out, he called, and stand on the mountain before God. And God passed by. It was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by the power of God. But God was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake. But God was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire. But God was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was still small voice.
It's such a beautiful text, and there are a lot of ways to go with it. So I'm curious what you've always made of this text. But for me, I think it's always interesting that sometimes you expect that you're going to get something out of a certain experience, but then the experience itself maybe disappoints you. But it was something you didn't expect, something much more minor that actually is where you found what you were looking for. I know that's very broad without a solid example, but for instance, like I think some people maybe like let's go back to Israel, right? Like the Western Wall, the Kotel is supposed to be this, I mean, it is our holiest site, right? But some people go and feel like, I just felt like I was praying to a wall. You know, and at the end of the day, it is only a retaining wall. It's not even a remnant of the actual temple. And so some people feel like, oh, but you know what did it for me? When I ordered falafel.
Yeah.
Because the conversation I had and the way we were able, it just felt like brothers or what sisters, you know what? But so that's what I mean by like, maybe God isn't always in the big moments or experiences where you're expecting this like revelation to happen. But then in a moment where you give up and you go get falafel, oh my God, now I feel this sense, now I feel God, now I feel, you know, my Jewish community. So,
In some falafel.
it is, and it's always the hole in the wall, right? Yeah, it's not the one you expect. It's the hole in the wall.
better.
Yeah.
In Hebrew, it's ruach gdola v'chazak, so there is like masculine and feminine on ruach.
Oh, that is interesting, and I don't know that I've ever noticed that.
The question is the chazak?
No, it's the wind, look at
No,
the English,
no.
it says, yeah, the English.
No.
But ruach.
He's noticing that.
מפרקת ההורים. You have to finish.
Okay, so the question is, check out how it says Veruah, so that's wind, right? Gedolah is big or great, V'chazak is strong, but it should be, the one is feminine, Gedolah, it's in the feminine tense, the Chazak is in masculine. So why, if they're both describing Ruach, why is one in the masculine and one is the feminine? I was thinking that maybe that's a beautiful way of saying that God cannot be gendered, but. Ruchot,
That's what I'm thinking.
I don't know.
I have to check it out.
Right, but why wouldn't it be chazakah?
It should be chazak.
The chazak is mefarek harim. How do you say mefarek harim?
But
Shattering?
Shattering. The chazak,
But it,
so I don't know if chazak is for God, for the wind.
it's, the English translation is the wind. There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains, shattering rocks by the power of God. So it's the wind.
It's really interesting. I don't know. I think that I'd like to look into commentary about that.
What chazak? What is
Dola.
describing the ruach with that human infant?
Which is exactly what Fiona is pointing out.
But it's not nice.
And Helena is saying it's because God is both.
Neither.
Yeah, or neither. Right. Right. So no, that's a really interesting point. I'd have to do more research. I don't know. I didn't know. But I like the drashes that are coming from around the table. Okay, so that's one way I always look at it, that maybe it's in the unexpected. But again, to our point, that it's actually in the silence that speaks louder than the noise, right? That you would expect if you were to hear the booming voice of God, that it would be some great loud sound, but instead it's actually the soft. And there are a couple of things, like my dad, who is a writer and he started in theater, he would always give an acting note when I did like theater in school, which is you might think that you have to deliver this loud, especially when you're projecting. But there's nothing that makes an audience focus in more. When you're quiet, they have to sit, like literally the posture is, right? And all of a sudden, you're signaling that this is important when you're quiet. When you're loud, you may, you kind of push away from it, right? So there's something compelling about silence. And so I think it's so interesting that that is where God is found. And it goes back, Marsha, to your point about meditation, right? That it's, if you can find and carve out the quiet, that's where revelation happens. And that's where later, at the very end of this text study too, when we get to Rabbi Wolpe, I also brought something from Rabbi Sachs. So I'll call on Francis to read that because President Britt, I would like to read. Later, I'm gonna get to it later, at the end. He explains that the reason revelation happens in Bamidbar, in the wilderness, is that it's quiet there. It is sort of this like transcendentalism, Thoreau at Walden, but also look at the drash you can make out of Bamidbar. Right, medaber, speak, right? That you can actually hear God speak in the wilderness in a way that you can't in loud, bustling society. Okay, let's move on to our next text. This is our first Midrash, Exodus Rabbah. Who would like to read? Again, going back to that moment of revelation. Go ahead, Larry, thanks.
Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the Holy Blessed One gave the Torah, no bird twittered, no fowl flew, no ox lowed, none of the Ophanim stirred a wing, the seraphim did not say, holy, holy. The sea did not roar, the creatures did not speak. Rather, the whole earth was hushed, the breathless silence, and the voice went forth, I am Adonai, your God.
This is one of Rabbi Alex's favorite Midrashim, and she's by the way, she is an introvert, whereas I feel like I'm more extroverted. But she has always been somebody who deeply values silence and needs it to recharge, right? Whereas for me, I don't necessarily need to retreat into silence. I get energy out of conversation or out of being in the presence of others. But for her, I think this speaks so saliently because I love that the whole world is quiet. And I brought some other texts that speak to the whole world being loud, a loud place, a place where the birds sing, the world itself sings praise to God as well. Not just animals that are capable of sort of chirping or singing, but the heavens declare God's praise. We're gonna get there, right? But that's the actual world is constantly being loud, right? There was a Midrash a long time ago we brought where there are sounds that that no one can hear, but they're actually so loud that they go from one end of the earth to the other. And one was the sun moving through the sky. The rabbis say it makes like a chain, like almost like a chainsaw kind of hacking noise. They obviously didn't have chainsaws then, but you know, like that kind of a sawing through the sky. The other is a soul leaving, like the moment that a soul leaves a body. Ron, I see your hand. I'm just gonna finish this one thing and then I'm gonna call on you, but, right, so whereas and when Joshua stops the sun in the sky, there's a miracle, and when Josh stops the sun in the sky, it's the word used is the same with, when Aaron was silent by Edom. It's by Edom Hashem, or that the sun was silent. So to me, it seems like the natural state of the world is to be in song or to be loud, although we can't always hear it. In some ways we can, the birds chirping, but in other ways we can't, the sun moving through the sky, things like that. But in this case, when Torah was given, not only were we sort of awed into silence, the entire world was awed into silence. Again, signaling an important thing is happening. We can't miss it, right? Shh. Lean in the front of your seat. Okay, Ron, go ahead, and then Jerry.
Well, two things. One is there's something to be said for whispering instead of speaking loudly, because it does make people listen to you.
Exactly.
And the other one I was going to say is that an interrogation technique is to not ask another question, just to be silent and let the other person put his foot in his mouth.
Right, again, it's just how painful silence is, right? It draws it out of you. Go ahead, Jerry.
To me, silence is a personal, individual item, and noise is more a group activity. Because in the silence, it's an individual's ability to make of it what he or she will. They can intuitive this or that. Whereas if you're in noise, the noise itself directs you into certain directions so that you're no longer making your own decisions or making some sense out of it. You're having to follow the group. So it's a very personal thing, silence, compared to noise.
Interesting. Oh, I love that. So silence is personal, whereas noise, you're sort of at the whim. You don't have control over it, right? It goes in the direction of the group. It sort of steers the conversation or whatever. The noise is no longer in your control. It's determined by a group. But silence is sort of a blank canvas. And so what you choose to make of that is sort of like that personal undertaking.
And I may make something different of it than you would.
Right.
That's okay.
Yes. I love that. Okay, let's move on. Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our ancestors. This is a fascinating one. And just some context, it's going to say Shimon, his son. Whose son? It's Rabban Gamliel, who we've talked about a number of times in this class. Remember, Rabban Gamliel was the head of the Sanhedrin. So his son also becomes head of the Sanhedrin, which is the ancient rabbinic court, the great court. He was head of it, Shimon, his son, was head of it when the temple falls in 70. But his father, we know who he was. We know of his debates with Rabbi Yehoshua, how he humiliated him once, remember, and he was sort of removed after that. But this is talking about Shimon, his son. So the son of the great Rabban Gamliel, himself also a great sage. Let's read. Who wants to read this one? Go for it, Jerry. Thanks.
Shimon his son used to say, all my days I grew up among the sages, and I have found nothing better for a person than silence. Study is not the most important thing, but actions. Whoever indulges in too many words brings about sin.
A couple interesting things about this. Number one, Rabbi Josh Polk, who is the head of the conservative yeshiva in Jerusalem, where we studied during rabbinical school, he has a lot of commentary. He translates text onto Sefaria, the website, which is amazing if you don't know it. It's got all of the text on there. He does a lot of the translating into English, and he also does some commentary explaining things. When he explains this one, he says, we don't actually hear Shimon ben Gamliel is not actually quoted much in our text. So it's interesting that this gives us maybe a reason why, right? He valued silence. He really was somebody who did not speak much, and you wouldn't expect that given his upbringing. You can imagine the Shabbos table that Shimon ben Gamliel grew up and was raised on, right? Which would have been a loud, raucous, I mean, in the Beit Midrash scene of all the great sages coming around a table and arguing it out. And he got to be audience to that. He's absorbed that as a kid, as a young boy. And you'd think that you can have one of two reactions to that. One is you really go in that direction and you've seen it your whole life and you know how beautiful and how wonderful. The other is, I just like some peace and quiet. You have to, it's overwhelming, right? It's overwhelming. And it's also kind of like, what he's saying is so interesting because he's saying not just that it's overwhelming, but that anyone can talk.
Yeah.
Right? It's not about talking, it's about walk the walk. Right? So he's saying, all my days I grew up among the sages, I've not found anything better for a person than silence. Study is not the most important thing, but actions. And this is a classic rabbinic debate. What's more important? And you could argue either side, because if you don't study, how do you know how to act? But if you only study and don't act, what good was your study? Right? So it's a good debate. You could have it out. But he's taking a firm stance that it's study, that action is the most important. And action in this case, I think is being linked to silence. That sort of there's talking about doing something, you're talking about what matters, but it's the actual doing, and that doing could be silent, right? In this case, I think the action is more like a nonverbal thing you do. Whoever indulges in too many words brings about sin. And this is a really controversial statement because we are all about that give and take. And our oral tradition is just that. It's an oral tradition that's passed down. If you don't talk, you don't have learning. You don't have the tiltul, like the give and take that leads to halakha, no, tiltul is caring. What's the phrase I'm looking for? I'm blanking on it, but basically you gain insight through your raucous Beit Midrash. So it seems crazy that we would be saying that silence is actually to be valued over that.
But you have to be wise to know the line between saying enough and too much.
Right.
I mean, we see this, I hate to be political, we see this in the political world, people who talk, and are really saying nothing,
Right.
and their actions are showing more loudly than all the words they're saying too, but too much, too many words.
Okay, wonderful. So one thing, first of all, shakla v'karya is what I was looking for. That's the give and take. But yeah, so this idea that, especially on the political scene, you can see that like it's easy to talk. It's much harder to do, right? And that's sort of like the empty promises, right? Where you can promise all these things, but then the leadership is much harder when you actually have to get things done. But so there's a talking too much. So knowing there's a line, there's a difference. There was another story where two rabbis are being asked by some emperor, maybe it's the Roman emperor, I can't remember, but saying what's better, silence or talking? And the one who makes the case for talking says, of course, talking. Without talking, you couldn't tell the bride how beautiful she is. You couldn't comfort the brokenhearted. Without speech, you wouldn't have anything at all. And when the one who values silence is about to make a case for silence, the first one interrupts and says that you're about to make the case with speech. So that should show you that it's more important. And then they stop him and say, no. He corrects says, no. It's not about not talking at all. It's about not saying too much. Right? And I think that's true. I think often we feel like, oh, I should have stopped. I went on to, I couldn't.
One word too many.
Right. And that's sort of the Lincoln letter, right? Abraham Lincoln wrote a letter once to a friend saying, I'm so sorry for the length of this letter. I didn't have time to write a shorter.
That's cool.
Ron is texting me, and if he were sitting here, he would whisper to me, sermons that are too long. No, but it's true. David Wolpe, who we're gonna get to at the end, he has a rule that he doesn't go past 7 minutes.
I love that man.
And he says, if I can't say it in 7 minutes, 7 minutes is a good long time. It's enough to say it.
That's good.
Go ahead.
Rabbi Rudin Leary says the sweet spot is 11 minutes for a sermon.
Yeah.
And in case you don't know, I time a lot of them, and he really hits that a lot of times.
He does. But sorry, I don't usually I should. But, what, the case I'll make for longer sermons, and again, I hope you don't feel mine are too long, I don't try, but is that you really want to explore an idea and both sides of it. And so when I feel like I've got a long sermon, it's because either I didn't have the time to really make it concise, or because you really want to give justice to both sides of an issue, and that takes really unpacking, instead of just giving your point, which I could certainly do in 7 minutes, but if you wanna, anyway, it's hard. But,
So what is too many words? Who decides what's too many?
That's good.
Rabbi?
I'll say, and I'll get you in just a second, Bob. I don't know that there's a clear demarcation,
There isn't.
right? So it's subjective, it's hard to know.
When they
It's hard to know.
start throwing fruit.
Like when they start throwing fruit. But I think for the rabbis, words and conversation are so crucial in that it's how you learn Torah, right? But if your words are not in service of Torah, if it's not L'Shem Shemayim, that's, I think then it would be, I think the rabbis would say, there's no value to this. Right? But it's hard, I don't know, yeah, stop.
What I think, what that means to me is that if you're going so deeply into something and the rules become so confining that they become unlivable, unworkable, you've extended it too far. And that if you had stopped shorter, it would be something you could live with.
Interesting.
Yeah, or if you're talking and you're just going, you start with a point and you're going on and on and on, and you lose track of where you're going. We learned from a friend that their personal clue is land the airplane.
Right.
Land the plane, because they're just circling
Right.
and bouncing. Start with a point, and like you say, you can explore it all, but get back to where you meant to be.
Right. And it's hard. I had a teacher in rabbinical school. He's coming for the installation, Rabbi Ed Feinstein.
Yeah, we're
He taught
looking forward.
homiletic. Sorry?
We're looking forward.
Yeah, oh, I can't wait.
We're
He's-
excited.
He is wonderful. And one thing that he says when he teaches you writing sermons, he says, anything that is not directly relevant, you have to cut it. And it's sort of what writers would call blood cuts, right?
Yeah.
Or like killing your darlings, right? But I love that story, or this is, I really want to share that. If it's not directly, you just have to cut it. You use it somewhere else, but not in this. But it's hard. Sometimes it's hard. Okay, so this is going back to what Bob said earlier from Mishlei. Bob, do you want to read even a fool who keeps?
Even a fool who keeps silent is deemed wise, intelligent who seals their lips.
It's really good.
Right. Imagine if I didn't say anything at all. You might think, wow, he must be stewing on something. Right? This guy must be brilliant. But then I open my mouth and I say something silly, and then, okay, yeah. He's not so great. Right? But the mystery of it, the what you're not saying can sometimes speak louder than. Okay, I just included that because I thought it was okay, now going back to how the environment, the world around us is loud. And yet we can't always hear it. Psalm 65, who wants to read? Go for it.
To you, O God, silence is praise in Zion. Meadows are clothed with flocks, the valleys mantled with grain. They raise a shout, they break into song.
So this is going back to what we're talking about, how silence can be praise. And I'm curious what you think of this, because to you, oh God, silence is praise. Right in the latter half, we have the point about the world around you even sings praises. And I love that they raise a shout, that thinking about valleys and hills, shouting and breaking into song. I just love it. But to you, God, silence is praise. And again, I think about the silent Amidah. And I think about how that comes from Hannah, right? Hannah in the book of Shmuel and Samuel, she is desperate for a son. She's infertile. She can't have one. She goes to Shiloh to Eli, the priest. She prays at the altar, and Eli thinks she's drunk, right? Because the way that she's pouring her soul out to God, it says that her mouth moved, her lips moved, but no words were heard. And so he thinks, what is this? I don't even recognize this as prayer. She must be drunk. And she says, no, I am just pouring out my soul before God. So the fact that a priest, Eli, couldn't recognize authentic prayer when it smacked him in the face. And the rabbis picking up on that derive our Amidah from Hannah. Hannah, there is a section that begins, how many halachot can be derived from Hannah's prayer? And the rabbis go on to take, and we use it. That's today, the way we pray the Amidah, so much of it is coming from Hannah's prayer. And it's silence, right? And I think, again, it's that idea that silence is reaching a place that words can't. That for God, the ultimate praise isn't, you think of King David on the harp and you think of the music and you think of the poetry and finding the right word, and that's got to say something, right? You would think that would be the highest form of praise. And you can make the argument that it is, but at least, again, the psalmist, David, I'm not sure if this one's attributed to him, but if it is, even he, the great psalmist, is acknowledging that to God, silence is praise.
I agree.
And I think that goes to what you were saying about Shoal Sisters, right? That's okay. Let's go, Helena, because it's been a while, and Jerry.
The same way, if you see an unbelievable sunrise or sunset, you are in awe, you are silent because it's so awesome.
And that's Rabbi Heschel says, like, that is where religious experience happens.
Yeah.
So, yeah, right? When you're shocked into silence, when you're stunned into silence, and that's praise. It's, yeah, I'm at a loss for words.
Yeah.
But there's there's a soul prayer there. Go ahead, Jerry.
There's a flaw in this. I mean, silence can also be masquerading indifference,
Right.
opposition, boredom.
Right.
Not everybody who's silent is kind of communing with God.
Right.
They may be thinking about what kind of pizza they want for dinner. So you have to be careful
Right.
to how much goodness you ascribe to silence.
I agree, because silence is complacency, right? If that's actually a legal term, right? Silence, there's sort of in silence, and then when you look at the Holocaust, the Shoah, I mean, when you look at now, right? It's silent, and T.S. Eliot says the world doesn't end with a bang, but with a whimper. Right, that the failure to speak out, or the inability to, or if you're speaking up but you're not heard or you're not believed, right? That is a lethal kind of silence.
Yes.
So yes, thank you for bringing that balance. And I thought when I was originally putting this together, that I would spend half of the time building up silence, the other half exploring. Again, when you explore two sides of an idea, but for the sake of brevity and time, I decided only to make it for silence. But in another session, we should talk about the dangers of silence.
It's a control.
So thank you for bringing that up. Okay, let's go back on one more psalm, and then we'll get to what the rabbis say, and we'll still end on time. Again, I just love the idea of the world being possessed of a song that we can only try to hear. And I know, Jerry, during Tu B'Shvat, we were talking about this, and you were saying, can we really hear a tree? Like, what is?
Yes.
And I think about that a lot, but and no, I think it is, no, like, I think in so many ways we can't, and yet I find it so romantic, and a spiritual part of me really does believe that there is. And there are these videos actually of people putting like,
Seismic.
yeah,
Things, yeah.
yeah, they hook up the soil, or like
Mhm.
mushroom, or
Yeah.
soil of the roots of a tree to this machine,
Mhm.
and you see
Yeah,
electric
crackle.
impulses, and it actually makes the sound. Like, so there's a frequency, and the frequency is sound, and it makes like music.
Yeah.
So I think, there maybe scientifically, but certainly spiritually, the idea that the world is singing,
Mhm.
that we just have to try to hear it. So let's go to Psalm 19. Who wants to read? Go for it, shoot, thanks.
My favorite. The heavens declare the glory of God. The sky proclaims his handiwork. Day to day makes utterance. Night to night speaks out. There is no utterance. There are no words whose sound goes unheard. Their voice carries throughout the earth. Their words to the end of the world.
So I think what we'll do is we'll actually go from here to Wolfie and then to Sachs, because I think this connects more to what Wolfie's about to say. But in so many ways, I think this is sort of this religious debate, which is, and he talks about this in his book, but why if God exists, why doesn't God speak to me. You know, why can't God, why is God silent? In the face of so much pain and suffering, why does it appear as if God is silent? And that's the whole Aaron being silent. There's a commentary that maybe he's mimicking what he perceives to be God's silence. And yet, a religious response to that, and it doesn't work all the time, because you see terrible things in nature too. But I love Psalm 19 as sort of a response to, you think God doesn't talk all the time? The heavens declare the glory. Look at, this is God talking. Look around you. This is the word of God. I quote this all the time because I love it, but from the book The Overstory, beans, corn, squash, and maize, living things alone disclose the wordless mind of God. Love it. Okay, so let's go into in speech and in silence. He wrote this after his mother suffered a stroke, young. I think she was in her 50s or 60s. And she had been otherwise previously totally healthy, and it gave her aphasia. She couldn't speak. And he wrote a book in response to that experience, feeling like there was still speech in this woman, although she couldn't vocalize it. So who wants to read his?
I will.
Go for it.
The Sound of Silence.
Oh, wait, sorry. I'm gonna come back to you
Okay.
for Sachs, because I'm skipping ahead.
Oh, you're going to in speech and in
And then we're gonna
silence.
call on you for Rabbi Sachs. So who wants to read Rabbi Wolpe at the end there? Go for it. Thanks, Larry.
The drama of religious history has been to hear the strain of a voice with a silence. Perhaps the core of faith can be defined as a certainty that even in the silence there is a message. It is the paradox of listening for that which cannot be heard. The realization that part of the music resides in the spaces between the notes. The word, like a note, is limited, confined to its own place on the musical register. Silence can contain within it all the music that can be played, for all of it emerges from silence. A word is a note. Silence is a symphony.
He's so good.
That's wonderful.
Don't you get angry? Don't you get angry at talent? I get angry at it. Very good. Okay, let's wrap up now with The Sound of Silence. You picked it up, but not by Art Garfunkel and Paul Simon. This is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. So Francis, will you read for us?
I define this as a sound you can only hear if you are listening. In the silence of the midbar, the desert, you can hear the medaber, the speaker, and the meduba, that which is spoken. To hear the voice of God, you need a listening silence in the soul. The silence that counts in Judaism is thus a listening silence, and listening is the supreme religious art. Listening means making space for others to speak and be heard. Thus, Judaism is not only a religion of doing and speaking, it is also a religion of listening. Faith is the ability to hear the music beneath the noise. There is the silent music of the spheres. We have lost the habit of listening to the sound of transcendence, a voice beyond the merely human. That was a lovely piece that you did. That's true.
So as we're approaching Shavuot, which is the season of revelation, of receiving Torah, I wanted to end in that place of Bamidbar, which is the book we're now beginning, right? Which is in the wilderness. Why does God have to take us in the wilderness before we merit the land of Israel? We need some silence, right? We've just experienced the inhumane and awful oppression of Egypt, degrading. And before we can merit to enter the land of Israel, we need to have some meditation, right? Some silent meditation to dissociate from the Egyptian mindset and to start to grow what it means to be an Israelite, what it means to be a Jew, right? As removed from what Egypt was. So we need silence in order to hear the voice of God and what God is telling us. So as we're, again, approaching the season of Revelation, I want us to not only like with last week, we talked about chesed, the importance of acts of loving kindness. And this week, we also talked about Shimon ben Gamliel saying that action is more important than study. But I wanted to, and while I think both of those are incredibly true and so important, I want to elevate another component of the discussion, which is the value of silence and listening, and how active it is, to the point where it seems ridiculous. Like, am I actually going to hear the world sing around me? But I think that's the Jewish challenge, is to hear the voice of God, the message in the silence, the sound of the world around you. And what is it telling you? What is it calling out to you? In a moment now where it's so noisy, and we're talking about the news all the time, what's going on in Israel, and we can't really separate from it, nor should we, right? And it's a privilege in America that we can even talk about tuning it out. So I'm not saying tune it out. I'm not saying tune it out. But for our own souls, we do have moments of not retreats in space, but retreats in time, our Hagim, our holiday festivals, time to try to carve out moments of silence to think, because it is so hard to hear the sound of our own voice. It's so hard to hear the voice of God in the world around us with so much noise and so much pain and suffering. So my hope for us this Shavuot is that we can try to find just a moment of silence to tap in and hear our own voice and hear the voice of God, because that's where Torah is given. It's in the silence. It's Bamidbar. So an early Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Thank you as always for learning together, and have a great end of the week.
Thank you.
And so glad you're back with us in person.